Welcome to Vitamin OC. I'm Whitney Gomez.
And I'm Joanna Weiss. Every week, we bring you your recommended dose of civics and civilization in Orange County.
And Joanna, this week we need an extra dose of Vitamin OC. It's been a very busy political week with the primary in California, and some of the results were surprising, some were confusing, and we're going to work through all of them today.
Yeah, we have had a wild governor's race. We have a very close supervisor race that I know we're both watching. And right here in Orange County, we have quite a lot of drama going on. And so we are here to talk about that.
And we don't have answers for everything yet either, which is kind of frustrating.
Right, which we can talk about why we don't have the answers as well. We'd like to introduce our guest, Dr. Michael Moodian, here with us, and we are excited to have you tell us about the election and what it means.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Whitney and Joanna. Thanks for having me.
And we're so glad you're here. You are a faculty member at Chapman University, where you teach leadership studies and leadership development programs. You co-direct Chapman's Orange County Annual Survey, which gives you particularly invaluable insight into Orange County voters, public opinion, and civic life.
You have served as an expert commentator on television and radio. Your public service resume is quite extensive. You were appointed by both Governor Jerry Brown and Governor Gavin Newsom to California's Commission on Judicial Performance. You were chair from 2023 to 25, and you've been there 10 years. Dr. Moodian also was appointed by Governor Newsom to the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission.
Right. Just joined that commission late last year.
Great.
You're also a co-producer, co-director, and lead writer of the award-winning PBS documentary Coastal Crisis, California's Vanishing Beaches. And Orange County Register named you one of the county's most influential people 3 years in a row. Congratulations.
Thank you. You know, it's a slow news year when they start naming me to these lists.
Hardly. That's a quite impressive list.
And so before we get down to individual races, when you've looked at California's primary election results, what immediately has stood out to you?
First and foremost, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the governor's race. So all the way up until late April, really no one had any idea who the frontrunner was in the governor's race. If you look back to all of the races we've had in this century, so post Gray Davis, Arnold Schwarzenegger very much was the frontrunner. After the recall, everybody figured that Schwarzenegger was the person to beat in that particular race. And then it was Jerry Brown's race to win. Jerry Brown easily beat Meg Whitman and then beat Kashkari 4 years later. And then it was Newsom's a race to win. Newsom easily won both of his elections and easily survived a recall. It was much different this year. This year reminds me so much of 1998. In 1998, there really was no frontrunner, and Gray Davis came out of nowhere, really third place, to win the governorship in 98. So I see a lot of similarities between Gray Davis in 98 and Javier Becerra this year. Also, frankly, from a personality perspective, you see that Becerra comes in the aftermath of some flashier governors and some governors who were maybe a little more personable. And sometimes the voters prefer maybe someone who, for lack of a better term, is a little bit more on the boring side. You get a George Deukmejian once in a while. And this year, at least, it looks like it's Javier Becerra in the top two. So the other fascinating aspect of this is Becerra emerged out of nowhere. He was a second-tier candidate up until the time Swalwell dropped out of the race. And from that moment, really ascended. Remember when the USC debate was canceled, Becerra wouldn't have even made that debate. Didn't even qualify according to those criteria from USC. And that debate ended up being canceled anyway. But really, it all started when Swalwell dropped out. Becerra was the one that emerged out of that, and it's looking like it's going to be a Becerra Steve Hilton race, even though there's still a slim chance that Steyer advances to the top two.
Well, obviously, the governor's race had enormous attention. But what do you see as the most important story coming out of this week? Is it voter turnout, the top two primary system, or just the political mood?
I would say all of the above. The top two primary system, this is the result, of course, of Proposition 14 in 2010. And it's funny, I don't know of many people who like the top two primary system, yet we have it. The parties hate it. We have parties for a reason, and that's, we have primaries for a reason, and that's to determine who the standard bearer of each party is ultimately. But I think this specific go-around shows you the messiness of the top two primary system. You have in the 40th, You have two Republicans who likely will advance to the general if young Kim continues the pace that she's on right now. And the big threat all the way up until recently was that maybe it was two Republicans who would advance, and then the tables are starting to turn, and it looked like potentially two Democrats could advance in the general for the governorship. The whole idea of the top two primary was that Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a big champion of this, felt that it would bring more moderates to the table and people who'd be willing to work across the aisle. And it didn't really work out that way. Instead, what we have is we have messy elections, and a lot of the elections are determined by how many candidates from each party are running and who's going to split that share of the vote. So that's been a big storyline. That's been a big storyline the past several weeks.
I'm a big fan of the show Survivor, and it kind of reminds me of the curse on Survivor is to get too far ahead of yourself.
Right.
And you're thinking two steps ahead. I feel like that's what the jungle primary does. You're not just figuring out this step, you're figuring out, well, who do we want in the general? And it's too much gamesmanship on both sides.
Right. Right. And it comes down to a law of numbers oftentimes. It's messy. And I'm not sure that this serves us best, but it's the reality that we're living in right now.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a bill or a proposition in the next 2 years to banish it again, to bring us back to a two-party system, because it has become very unpopular and highlighted so much through this election. And I think with the supermajority in the assembly, that I could see this being something that gets taken up, or at least becomes a ballot proposition for us to vote on.
Sure. Or maybe we see ranked choice at some point. It's interesting, but I don't see it as being very popular. When I speak to the clubs, the local groups around the county, nobody really likes it. And now what you're going to see in the 40th, for example, is young Kim all the way up until now was representing a purple district. Registration numbers were very close, but what happened against Calvert is both of them went to the right to try to out-Trump each other. But now what's going to happen is you have a whole base of Democratic voters and NPP voters, and I'm curious to see who they're going to support in the 40th. So it wouldn't surprise me if Kim now goes more to the center to try to court the Democrats and the no-party preference voters.
Just talking about this system, is it name recognition? Is it money? Is it consolidating the party? Is it being disciplined? Who wins?
It's usually name recognition, but I noticed that at least this time in the governor's race, what fascinated me is that big name, high-profile Democrats opted not to run. So Rob Bonta could have run, decided not to. Rick Caruso could have run, opted not to. There was a movement for Padilla to run. Padilla opted not to. For whatever reason, this go around, Antonio Villaraigosa is yesterday's news. Antonio Villaraigosa was a big rising star 20 years ago, but that, not so much anymore, has not been in elected office in a long time. So it's a combination of all of the above. But going back to that 1998 analogy, while Becerra reminds me of Gray Davis, Steyer reminds me of Al Checky, who was a very wealthy business person, wrote himself a check for $40 million in 1998, which adjusted for inflation, it's probably double that, and really couldn't get over that 13-14% threshold. In California, there is a history, Meg Whitman also be an example, of people, of voters not necessarily looking favorably upon people who are just going to try to fund their own campaign, of ultra wealthy people trying to just write an open check to their campaign. So it's a combination of everything.
Okay.
So other than the governorship, which has garnered a lot of news in the headlines, California's voters have also been having to vote on offices that deal with a lot of their day-to-day issues. We've got public safety elections, education, insurance, taxation, state finances. Is there another statewide result that you think deserves more attention than it's receiving?
Sure. Here's my issue, and I get on this high horse all the time and try to start a movement, not going far with it, but it's just, I believe strongly in this. I think that our state constitution needs to be revised. We have a constitution that worked for California in the 1900s, and I don't think it works for California today. Here's what I mean by that. We have an insurance crisis in the state. We have an affordability crisis in the state. In my humble opinion, I think our state would be better served if statewide positions like insurance commissioner, superintendent of public instruction, etc., were appointed by the governor as opposed to being elected separately, because then ultimately it's the governor who would be accountable if there's a problem or if there's something that's gone awry in that particular aspect of government. I would certainly say that given the insurance issues that we have and the lack of and all of the private insurance companies that are not providing insurance, the insurance commissioner, that's a big race. And there were a lot of controversies with Laura during his time. Laura's termed out now as insurance commissioner. So certainly that race. Superintendent of public instruction, really the power in education in the state is with the governor and the legislature. It's an important race. I don't really think we need a lieutenant governor in California. It's a relatively powerless position. I would argue that the president pro tem of the state senate should be the de facto lieutenant governor. I mean, that person, Monique Limon, could hop in and have that legislative expertise right away if needed. So on a statewide basis, out of all those, I would certainly say the insurance commissioner is the one. And we have a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors who did very well in the primary, and then also Allen. So that will be an interesting race to watch in the general.
Let's bring it back to Orange County
Sure.
and talk about the supervisor's race.
Mhm.
I think people don't understand how important that race is for citizens of Orange County.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that matchup?
The county board of supervisors, they oversee the multi-billion-dollar county bureaucracy. And in areas of Orange County that are incorporated, they aren't necessarily as influential or as powerful, but they do, oversee. We were the largest municipality to declare bankruptcy in the mid-1990s, the year that we declared bankruptcy, because there was a county treasurer who was playing games with public money, and there was a board of supervisors that wasn't calling him out on it during that time. So it's an important board in that, especially as it relates to services for the poor and the unhoused and healthcare, Cal Optima, and various budget issues. So Sarmiento, of course, had a very good election. That was expected. Sarmiento easily came away there. But the two battlegrounds in OC are the Katrina Foley-Diane Dixon race, where I live in South County, and then Connor Trout versus Tim Shaw in Northeast Orange County. Both interesting races. I think both races are going to draw a lot of money for the general. If the Foley-Dixon race makes it to the general, that's a little bit of an uncomfortable situation for Foley right now because Dixon is pretty close to 50%. So we'll see how that ends up working out. But taking Foley and Dixon, for example, there was a lot of money spent on both sides. And in the case of Dixon, the Lincoln Club really got behind Dixon and spent a lot of money. And then Foley had a lot of support from the public employee unions, public safety unions. And it's a close race. It's a close race. Foley's down by a couple of points right now against Dixon. The big number that Foley does not want Dixon to pass is 50%, because then it will not go to a runoff. What's interesting there is that one storyline that I don't see reported often is the Lincoln Club also spent some money on the third person in that race who's an educator, and I would argue that probably took a few points away from Foley.
Okay. Right.
Spoiler, if you will, who had no chance, who didn't have any real war chest to campaign. So that curious to see how that will go. But that's again, at the end of the day, Orange County in the 1990s, this was a solid red county. There was a 22% Republican advantage, and now there's about a 3 or 4% Democratic advantage in the county, but it's still purple county. That's a term we coined when we did our surveys in recent years, and then Dean Gould over at UC Irvine released a study this year talking about Orange County as purple county. We see that in the 5th District. It's a close race. There's about a 5% Republican registration advantage in the 5th District. Foley did very well in the last election. It's a close, tight race. Again, representative of purple county. Democrats have really made some substantial gains in the recent decade, but there's still a strong Republican base too. And that's what we're seeing.
Okay.
And I think there are still about 240,000 outstanding ballots in Orange County. We're assuming about a third of those are in the 5th District.
Right.
I think if, as a lot of the Republican ballots have been turned in, and the Democrats really sat on their ballots, I believe, because of the governorship election. So hopefully those returning ballots, so say 50,000 or so that are outstanding, will break for Katrina largely. So there's I think a window in which she could attain 50%, a little bit unlikely because of that third party candidate. But if she would have to get somewhere by my back of the napkin math, somewhere about 60% of the outstanding votes in order to win outright. But I think she would solidly see at least in the mid 50s range of the outstanding ballots. So I think I would imagine over the next couple of days break even with Dixon and then hopefully pull ahead. But I'm not sure she's going to be able to reach that 50% mark herself.
Yeah, there are two variables in the primary. Number one is that primaries usually draw a higher percentage of Republican voters, especially during an off presidential year. Number one. But number two, as you said, a lot of Democrats held on to their ballots because they wanted to see what was going on with the governor's race. So I 100% agree. I think that the numbers that we see will most likely benefit Foley, every day when the new results get posted.
In Orange County, we have about 37% voter turnout. I think that's been going up the last couple of days to where we might end up with a 42% turnout. Does that seem accurate to you?
Yes, that's right. It's right now right there between 37 and 40%. So that low 40% threshold.
Right, which sounds very low and say a bit dismal for turnout, but that does match historic trends, if I'm not mistaken.
By the end of the ballots being counted, we'll probably see somewhere in that low 40% range. It's about the norm. At the end of the day, most of our neighbors and our friends in Orange County, they're good people, they care, they're not, disengaged people, but they're also very busy and they're not closely following politics like three of us do. I think about my neighbors next door. One's a CPA, the other is a software engineer. They're very smart. They certainly have political opinions, but they call me when they're filling out the ballot and they ask for my suggestions. They don't follow these races and they don't really know who to vote for insurance commissioner, or who to vote for assembly, etc. So it's just it's human nature, unfortunately, especially during a primary year. You usually draw a higher percentage of people who are maybe older, perhaps retired, perhaps have a little bit more time to be able to do those things versus busy people who might have kids or who might be busy with their careers. So while it's unfortunate that we don't have a higher turnout, it's the nature of the beast, but we can expect a higher turnout for the general. Certainly. But a primary during a non-presidential year, you're just going to get a lower turnout.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And if we turn to Prop 50 for a second. So Prop 50 solidified some of the congressional seats within Orange County and within the state to be more solidly Democratic and redrew some of the Republican seats to maybe be a little bit more Republican as well, which is what we saw in the 40th district. Do you think that Orange County still acts as a bellwether for the nation? And are there any trends that you think we should be looking out for?
Orange County, as I mentioned earlier, Orange County for years and years, when I was growing up here in the 80s and 90s, Orange County was considered this coastal outlier among, all of these liberal coastal counties in California. Orange County was this conservative This was John Wayne territory. This was John Birch Society territory. And that changed. I think that Orange County now is much more like the rest of the United States. It's balanced politically and it's diverse in terms of its population and in terms of even socioeconomic status. So, yes, I think in many ways, if you want to know what the future of politics looks like, you can look to Orange County and see what's happening here. Look at these races such as Derek Tran's race and what's going on in our cities, etc. So, yeah, Orange County, absolutely, it's much more representative of the rest of the United States today, as opposed to being this conservative outlier that it was for decades and decades up until now.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the cities?
Sure. Okay. In our cities, our biggest cities in Orange County, Anaheim, for example, Santa Ana, Irvine, Huntington Beach, you're often seeing councils that will shift one way or another. But one thing that Democrats have done, and they've done well, not so much in Huntington Beach, but certainly in the other cities, is for many years, the Republicans in Orange County did a better job at getting people elected to city councils, to school boards, to community college district boards. This was during the Tom Fuentes era of the 1980s and various other times. The Democrats have done a much better job of this in the last 10 years. And we're seeing now an actual farm system for Democrats in Orange County. We're seeing this in Irvine. We're seeing this in Anaheim. And even in Huntington Beach, that council It certainly has swayed toward a kind of a mega council now, but it does tend to shift with each election, and there is kind of this counter revolution in the city, if you will. So we're seeing even in the cities used to really be dominated by Republicans. The 2010s and the 2000s and the 1990s, they're much more balanced now. They're much more balanced. Ashley Aiken is the mayor of Anaheim. There was a lot of controversy that was taking place there. So we're even seeing in the bigger cities in OC, it's becoming Democrats are making a lot of strides. There's an actual farm system, and there never used to be one.
And when WAVE was founded back in end of 2016,
Mhm.
about 70% of those local seats were held. The school boards and the city councils were held by Republicans.
Right.
That's, I think, shifted. My last statistic that I've seen is more about 55% are Republican held now. So we've closed about a 15% gap there on making sure that we have a farm system, which you identified really accurately that we didn't have before.
Right. Exactly.
And how about nationally, San Francisco, New York? How are Democrats doing in the cities nationally?
That's really what I'm keeping my eye on because most Americans live in urban areas. So for example, in California, you have a lot of Republican counties, but nobody really lives there. I mean, they're very small populations in Mono County and Nevada County and Trinity County, which are solid red. Really, where the voter base is, it's the coastal counties. And then here in Southern California, even if you can go inland into San Bernardino and Riverside, I'm very curious to see how successful the mayors of cities such as New York and San Francisco are. Two really different mayors ideologically. It shows you kind of the big tent of Democratic politics. You have Lori in San Francisco, a Levi Strauss, part of the Levi Strauss lineage, who is a kind of a business-friendly, moderate Democrat who has had some results so far in the time that he's been there as mayor. And then you have Mandami in New York City, who, of course, is more of a Democratic socialist. It's still early to see how that works out, but I'm really curious to see how the mayors do, especially the Democratic mayors in our big cities, because that will probably give us an indication of who's going to be able to draw the most momentum in 2028 as we have somebody who's going to represent the Democratic Party to run for president against, who knows, potentially J.D. Vance, Rubio ticket. It's hard to say, but look at the big cities and the mayors, and that will give you an indication at least of what's working and what the population is thinking in terms of their support.
Okay. And coming back to California, one of the
Mhm.
big frustrations is that election night is not really election night anymore. They're still processing ballots. What should we be looking for in the next couple of days? What's the cadence of the drops?
Yeah, it is frustrating. It doesn't go as fast as we'd like. This is the home of the AI revolution and of Silicon Valley, yet it takes a very long time for the results to come in. We don't seem to have the technology to be able to do it. A big reason for that is I've always been a big proponent of vote by mail. It used to be that if you wanted to vote by mail, you would register for it and you get a mail ballot. And then during COVID, it's just everybody votes by mail. Most people vote by mail now. It's very easy to do so. So what happens is you get all the ballots come in at different times. The one thing I will say is that I do believe in the integrity of our elections in California. I think we do it well. And what's important to me is that we get it right. And allegations of voter fraud, these are conspiracy theories. There are a lot of Republican DAs in California, and certainly if there was evidence that could be proven in court, that would be a big political victory for them if they could expose election corruption. I have yet to see it. And of course, if it happened, I would certainly want to crack down on it, but it doesn't. Election fraud is not an issue in California. But what we need to look out for is the Orange County Register of Voters website. It's very good. It's updated now every day at 5 p.m. And what they're doing is they're counting, the ballots that arrived kind of closer to election day, or a lot of the mail ballots, and they'll update those numbers. So what people will want to look at is where the numbers are trending. So as Joanna mentioned, in the case of Katrina, that gap has been closing in a little bit. Reminds me of the Harley Ruda Rohrabacher race from 2018, where Rohrabacher was up pretty substantially on election night, but little by little, every day when the results kept updating, Ruda was catching up. catching up, and then Ruta ended up winning a tight race. When Dave Min beat Scott Baugh, that was a tight race where Min ended up creeping up in the very end. So what voters want to look at is where it's trending every day, because that will show you what was on the mind of maybe those voters who voted a little bit later. And this is an interesting primary because so many Democratic voters held onto their ballots because they wanted to see what was going on with the governor's race.
Right. And this is where there are those allegations of fraud, because it's easy for Republicans, or just, and it's not even typical Republicans, but maybe the really conservative MAGA mentality, that they're finding votes, and that it's, the Democrats are creeping up at the end because they're quote unquote finding extra ballots, etc. And so while our slow process is methodical, and particularly here in Orange County, really good, stand by Bob Page and what he's done in the Orange County Registrar's office
Yeah.
after Neil Kelly's tenure ended. But it unfortunately does allow for some allegations of fraud because it takes so long, and it always does seem to benefit in California the Democrats towards the end. So that's the only problem with it, really.
And it's perpetrated by a president who makes allegations with no evidence, and then that ends up becoming the stance of
Right.
everyone else. Remember when Loretta Sanchez won her race and beat Bob Dornan? I mean, that was a very ugly race where there were accusations that undocumented people were voting for Loretta Sanchez, and that was it. It was simply not true. It was ugly, and we see this every time.
And just for the uninitiated, who's counting the ballots?
It's the Orange County Registrar's Office,
Orange County,
based
okay.
in Santa Ana, and the public can go there. And I remember a few years back, I was able to go and stand behind a glass partition and actually view them doing it. So it is they're appointed by the registrar is appointed by the Board of Supervisors, but it is a nonpartisan person, and we do a good job in Orange County. I will stand by that. And before that, there was Neil Kelly, who was an excellent registrar, and it's a secure process. There are a lot of things we don't get right. I do believe we get our elections right.
Okay, good.
They do it carefully. It's not as fast as we'd like, but it's done well.
I agree. So California was not the only consequential state for elections this last Tuesday. We've had consequential races in Iowa, New Mexico, New
Right.
Jersey, Montana, and South Dakota. When you look outside of California, what results do you think matter most for understanding the upcoming November election?
The big one that I have my eye on is actually, all those states, we need to follow what the states are doing, but I'm very curious about Tallarico in Texas. That is, right. and how Tallarico ends up doing. And again, it just shows you I think the Democratic Party, the whole idea of a big tent Democratic Party. So Tallarico, is somebody who maybe wouldn't win an election in California, but certainly appeals to a broad swath of voters in Texas. And I'm very curious to see that race and to see ultimately what happens there. There have been a lot of strides made by Democrats in Texas for a long time unsuccessfully. And with everything that we have and everything that we're facing this year, that's really the one that I have my eye on. When it's all said and done, it's that old James Carville saying, it's the economy, stupid. And people still, they're going to the grocery store. They're paying a lot for their groceries. They're paying a lot for daily cost of living. They pay a lot for gas. Inflation is still high. And all of these things were things that the current president said that he would immediately lower upon taking office. And the quality of life and cost of living has not, it hasn't improved for the majority of Americans. There are a lot of correlations between this year and 2018 when we did a countywide survey. And people laughed at us because we predicted a blue wave in Orange County right around this time because there was strong anti-Trump sentiment in Orange County. And it's driven not just by the Democratic voters, but by the no party preference voters. So what I'm very curious to see is how the NPP voters are going to sway. But I think we're going to see kind of that combination of the Democratic voters and the no party preference voters in Orange County and elsewhere across America helping. And, this, I think this will likely be a good year for Democrats nationwide.
And Tallarico, things on the Republican side went for him with Ken Paxton coming up as the nominee on the Republican side. I think that was best case scenario for the Democrats there.
Yeah.
So, assuming we get some results in the next, say, week,
Mhm.
where do you think people in Orange County should be focusing their attention?
People in Orange County, well, what's going to happen now is we'll have a whole new slate of items to vote on now for November. So, what I really encourage people to do is in the coming months, as you start to approach now the general, really, pay close attention to who you're voting for these down ballot races. These are important races, and it's going to be a much larger ballot in November because now we're going to have propositions and so many other things to vote on for the general. So obviously the Board of Supervisor, the two main Board of Supervisor races, the fifth, and then the Connor Trout race, that'll be an interesting race in terms of who maintains control of the county board of supervisors. It's been a 3-2 Democratic majority, but the Democrats have been pretty split on that board. So that's been an
like a
interesting
2-2 and 1.
Yeah, 2-2 and 1.
Right.
It's been an interesting dynamic the last couple of years. So Connor Trout is a very impressive up and coming member of the party. So but he's going to be in a tough race ultimately against looks like it's going to be Shaw, but it's still not quite determined yet. So it's those board of supervisor races. It's who's going to emerge in these city races as well, and then we're going to have a slate of propositions as well. We're a little different in California. The legislature hates propositions because it's this whole idea of direct democracy, and I don't think the propositions work the way Hiram Johnson intended. It was meant to be, of course, this method of people to kind of directly be able to influence legislation, but it just ended up becoming something that special interests have been able to get behind. But that's neither here nor there. But and what we should really be looking toward is what's happening nationally. And in the general in November, we're going to see probably a correlation between Trump's favorability and how that affects races here in Orange County and in California.
Okay.
And to give Vitamin OC a little plug, stay tuned, listeners and viewers. We will be bringing some of those local races, some of those candidates to you so that people can get to know them.
And certainly the propositions. People need to know more about the propositions before they vote.
Right. So we'll continue with our voter education and voter outreach issues and try to make sure that our listeners are as informed as possible about the ballot. Dr. Moodian, thank you so much for being with us today. We are incredibly grateful for sharing your time and your expertise. And thank you for what you do for our county. I think you really make sure that people are and our students are as educated as possible. And you provide so much information out there and are such a great representative of Orange County. So thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Really great to meet you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for your recommended dose of civics and civilization in Orange County.
We'll see you next time on Vitamin OC.